This poor girl is so dumb she can't even clean a table." The billionaire CEO leaned back, laughing with his friends, and sneered in Spanish. But when the young black waitress calmly answered back in flawless Spanish, the entire restaurant froze, and his smile vanished. Nia Carter was 24 years old, a young black woman with tired eyes and dreams she rarely spoke about. She worked long shifts as a waitress in a high-end Manhattan restaurant where the customers treated her like furniture. Her mother was sick at home in a small rented apartment, and Nia's paycheck kept the lights on. On that particular night, the room smelled of wine and money. Men in suits laughed too loudly, women clinked glasses, and Nia moved silently between tables. At the corner table sat Alejandro Vega, a billionaire CEO known for arrogance. His tie was sharp, his smile sharper, and his words carried the weight of someone who thought he owned the world. As Nia poured his drink, Alejandro leaned to his business partners and muttered something in Spanish. They chuckled, glancing at her as if she were invisible. He assumed she couldn't understand. His tone was mocking, his laughter cruel, painting her as nothing more than a servant. The insult cut through her chest, but Nia stood frozen, balancing the glass like it was her last piece of dignity. For years she had swallowed humiliation, smiled through pain, and stayed quiet to survive. But that night was different. Her heart raced, her palms burned, and her mind replayed every sacrifice she had ever made. Alejandro's arrogance filled the room like smoke. Everyone at his table laughed, until Nia finally opened her mouth. In fluent, perfect Spanish, she answered back. The laughter stopped. Alejandro's smile vanished. The entire restaurant froze as silence swallowed the room. Nia's story didn't begin in that glowing restaurant. It began in a two-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, where the ceiling leaked when it rained and the walls held more prayers than paint. She was raised by Evelyn Carter, a single mother who once taught English at a public school before illness forced her into bed. Nia had dreamed of becoming a lawyer, someone who could stand in courtrooms and fight injustice with words sharper than any weapon. But dreams don't always wait for the rent to clear. When her mother's medical bills piled up and scholarships dried out, Nia dropped out of college and took jobs wherever she could. Restaurants, retail, cleaning houses, it didn't matter. Responsibility came first. Working at La Sirena, the Manhattan restaurant, was supposed to be temporary. She kept telling herself that. The pay was decent, the tips unpredictable, and the customers mostly ignored her. Yet the weight of silence crushed her every day, and sometimes she wondered if invisibility was more painful than hatred. That night with Alejandro, the insult cut deep, but the wound was familiar. She had endured worse. She knew the sting of hearing her worth reduced to skin, accent, or position. She thought she had mastered the art of swallowing her pride, letting cruel words pass like air. But Alejandro's voice wasn't just cruel, it was dangerous. His laughter had a power to shape the room, to make others believe she was small. And as Nia cleared dishes from his table later that night, she overheard him again. This time, his Spanish words carried a threat. The next evening, Alejandro returned, bringing with him another group of wealthy clients. Nia felt the same knot in her chest when she saw him, but she forced her feet to move. The restaurant demanded perfection, and perfection meant swallowing fire without showing smoke. Alejandro's eyes flicked toward her the way a man looks at something disposable. He leaned toward his client, speaking again in Spanish, but this time louder. His words weren't subtle. He mocked her intelligence, called her slow, suggested she was only fit to carry trays. His guests chuckled, trying to match his arrogance. Nia's skin tightened, but she didn't answer. Not yet. She placed plates on the table, her face calm, though inside her heart pounded like a drum. Alejandro smiled wider, feeding off her silence. Later in the night, one of her coworkers whispered, "Don't mess with him. That man owns half the city. He can crush you." Their words weren't meant as comfort, they were a warning. Nia nodded, but her chest burned with something hotter than fear. When Alejandro rose to leave, he handed his check to the restaurant owner personally. His smile was polished, his tone smooth, but Nia caught the glint in his eyes. With a single sentence, he suggested that she was unprofessional, clumsy, a distraction. His words dripped with poison, and the owner forced a tight smile. Nia felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. The billionaire wasn't just mocking her anymore. He was planting seeds to take away the only job she had left. Long before Manhattan, long before billionaires and whispered threats, Nia had once loved language. Her best friend Rosa lived next door in Atlanta, a girl with wild curls and a grandmother who spoke no English. Nia would sit at Rosa's kitchen table, listening to Spanish float through the air like music. She wanted to understand, so she taught herself. Late nights after homework, she would play language tapes borrowed from the library. She scribbled notes in worn notebooks, repeating phrases until her tongue bent around the rhythm. She practiced in secret, not telling anyone, except Rosa. Her mother thought she was asleep, but Nia's room glowed with determination. The language became more than words. It was freedom. It was proof she could master something the world didn't expect of her. By the time she turned 17, she spoke Spanish fluently, but rarely showed it. It was her private strength, a weapon hidden in silence. Her father, before he passed, had once told her, "The world will underestimate you, Nia. Let them. That's your advantage." She carried those words like armor. Now, standing in the restaurant with Alejandro's insults ringing in her ears, she remembered every sleepless night, every phrase she had whispered to herself in the dark. She realized the time had come to stop hiding. The memory of her father's voice echoed louder than Alejandro's laughter. Nia tightened her grip on the tray, straightened her back, and made a decision that would change everything. She would no longer be silent.
The next time Alejandro mocked her, it happened in front of everyone. He sipped his wine, leaned back in his chair, and spoke in Spanish, dripping arrogance in every syllable. He called her a pobre muchacha, too poor and too foolish to matter. His friends roared with laughter. Nia's chest burned, but she kept her face calm. She walked to the table with steady steps, her tray balanced, her eyes sharp. She set the plates down one by one, and then she turned toward Alejandro. Her voice was calm, steady, and flawless in Spanish. Every insult he had thrown at her, she repeated back, word for word, but this time loud enough for the entire room to hear. Gasps spread through the restaurant. The air shifted. Forks stopped mid-air. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Alejandro blinked, caught off guard. He tried to laugh it off, but the laughter never reached his eyes. Nia's tone was sharp, her accent perfect, her words dripping with precision. The billionaire who thought she was invisible now sat exposed in front of his peers. A silence, heavy as stone, settled over the room. Guests exchanged shocked glances. Waiters peered from the kitchen door. For the first time, Alejandro Vega looked uncertain. He tried to smirk, lifting his glass as if nothing mattered. But the edge of his hand trembled. The arrogance cracked. Then with sudden violence, Alejandro slammed his glass onto the table, the sound echoing across the restaurant like a gunshot. Every head turned, and Nia realized this fight had only just begun. The sound of the shattered glass still rang in her ears when the night ended. Nia hurried through the back door, but Alejandro was already waiting outside, leaning against a black car with tinted windows. His smile had turned into something darker, colder. He spoke low, reminding her of the danger of embarrassing a man like him. He told her power could reach anywhere, even into her small apartment, even into her mother's sick room. He warned her that one more slip and she would regret it. His voice dripped with control, the kind only money buys. Nia walked home with her chest tight, her hands shaking. She knew he wasn't bluffing. Men like Alejandro didn't throw empty threats. They built empires on them. That night, her mother held her hand and prayed with her, whispering strength into her daughter's ears. Nia wanted to believe everything would be fine, but the air around her felt poisoned. The next morning, she opened her mailbox. Among the bills and letters was an official envelope. She tore it open, and her stomach dropped. It was an eviction notice. The date was final. No appeal, no chance. Her home, her mother's bed, their only place of safety, gone. The paper slipped from her fingers as tears filled her eyes. Alejandro Vega had just shown her how far his shadow could stretch. Nia sat on the floor of the apartment, holding the eviction notice like it was a weapon aimed at her chest. She had spent her life crawling out of one hardship after another, but this one cut too deep. Losing her job was one thing. Losing her home with her mother inside it was something else. She called landlords, begged for extensions, searched for miracles. Nothing came. Every door was closed. Her friends offered couches, spare rooms, even cash, but Nia refused. Pride was a cruel companion, but it was hers. One night, sitting beside her mother's bed, she broke down. Evelyn's voice was weak, but her eyes were sharp. She told Nia their family had always survived storms. "Strength runs in our blood," she whispered. And for a moment hope returned. But hope shattered quickly. The landlord admitted the building had been bought out by Alejandro's company. He didn't even try to hide it. Nia realized this wasn't just business. It was personal. Alejandro wanted her crushed. The rage burned hotter than fear. Alejandro thought she was a servant, a weak girl to be stepped on. He didn't know she carried steel under her skin. That night, as rain battered the city windows, Nia swore she would not let him win. For the first time, her pain turned into a plan. Nia reached out to Rosa, her childhood friend who had become a journalist. Rosa knew how to chase truth like fire, and she listened as Nia poured everything out. The insults, the threats, the eviction. Rosa's face grew hard, and she agreed to help. Together, they began to dig. Alejandro's name wasn't just tied to New York restaurants. His empire stretched into factories, shipping companies, and luxury hotels across the world. At first, the trail looked polished and clean, but the deeper Rosa searched, the uglier it got. They found stories buried in foreign newspapers, whispers of mistreated workers in Latin America, entire towns poisoned by his factories. Alejandro's empire wasn't just rich, it was rotten. Nia's heart pounded as she listened to Rosa's findings. The cruelty she had felt at her table wasn't a mask, it was his nature. And now she had proof that his power was built on broken backs. But with the truth came danger. Rosa looked at Nia with tired eyes and said, "If we push this out, he won't just fight. He'll destroy us." Nia knew that her friend was right. Alejandro had already taken her job, her home, her peace. If she went further, he could take everything. But she also knew silence was the only thing keeping him strong. And silence was no longer an option. The next week, Alejandro approached her in a way she didn't expect. No insults, no laughter. Instead, he offered her a seat at his private office. His tone was smooth, his smile calculated. He laid out papers on the desk, sliding them toward her like an easy solution. The deal was simple. He offered her a new job, higher pay, even an apartment. Enough money to cover her mother's treatments and erase her worries. All she had to do was agree to stay quiet, never speak, never challenge him again. The temptation cut deep. For a moment, Nia imagined her mother safe in a proper home, doctors paid, nights without fear. Her hands trembled as she touched the paper, but something inside her whispered caution. She flipped the contract and scanned the fine print. Hidden between the lines was a trap, a clause that stripped her of legal rights, silencing her forever. It wasn't help, it was a muzzle. Alejandro leaned back, smirking. He thought he had her cornered, thought her desperation would bend her will. Nia looked at the pen, then at him, her chest heavy with conflict. The money could save her mother's life, but the cost was her soul. Alejandro's voice slid across the desk, cold and sharp. Sign, or lose everything.
The pen felt heavy in her hand, but Nia's grip tightened. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, except for the hum of the city outside the windows. Then, slowly, she set the pen down. Her voice, steady and low, broke the silence. She refused. Alejandro's smile flickered, then hardened. He leaned forward, his mask of charm slipping away. Within hours, rumors spread. Nia was unstable, unprofessional, impossible to manage. Alejandro's money bought words, and those words traveled faster than truth. By the end of the week, the restaurant manager called her into the office. His face was pale, his tone rehearsed. She was fired. No discussion, no chance. Just a closed door and a goodbye. Nia walked out with her apron folded under her arm. The city air felt colder than ever. She was broke, unemployed, and almost homeless. But she carried something more dangerous than fear. She carried knowledge of who Alejandro truly was. That night, Rosa showed up at her door, her eyes fierce, her hands gripping a folder thick with papers. Inside were records, testimonies, and proof of Alejandro's crimes. The evidence could topple him, but it could also paint a target on their backs. Nia stared at the folder, her heart racing. She knew what it meant. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The folder Rosa carried was more than paper. It was a loaded weapon. Inside were recordings, photos, and testimonies of Alejandro's corruption. Nia knew if the world saw it, everything would change. But exposing a man with billions meant walking into fire. They began recording every interaction. Nia went back to the restaurant, pretending to collect her last paycheck. Alejandro was there, smug as ever. Rosa waited outside with a hidden microphone tucked into Nia's pocket. The moment came fast. Alejandro spoke freely, mocking Nia again, switching between English and Spanish. His words dripped with disdain, calling her worthless, promising no one would ever believe her. His voice was sharp, cruel, unguarded. The recording captured it all. Later, Rosa and Nia sat in a small diner booth, listening to his voice echo through cheap speakers. Each insult was another nail in the coffin he had built for himself. But fear still lingered. Alejandro wasn't stupid. If he suspected they were gathering evidence, he'd strike before they could release it. Rosa hesitated, her eyes serious. If we drop this, he'll come after us with everything he has. Are you ready for that? Nia swallowed hard, her chest pounding. She wasn't sure. The next day, her answer was forced. Alejandro caught them. His men cornered them outside Rosa's apartment, suits crisp, smiles cold. Alejandro stepped forward, eyes blazing. He told them if they dared to release a single word, he would bury them in lawsuits worth millions. The threat shook Nia to her core. Alejandro wasn't just powerful, he was ruthless. She and Rosa sat in silence afterward, the city lights buzzing outside the window. For the first time, Nia thought about quitting. She imagined a quiet life, maybe in another city, maybe working low-wage jobs forever, but safe. Her mother's frail body haunted her thoughts. Could she risk it? But that night, her mother spoke with a voice that cut through Nia's doubt. She told her about Nia's grandfather, a man who had marched in Selma when dogs and hoses met him in the streets. He had scars still visible when he died, but he never once regretted raising his voice. Her mother squeezed her hand and whispered, "Courage runs in your veins. Don't let fear decide for you." The words wrapped around her heart like steel. For the first time, she understood her fight wasn't just for her. It was for every voice that had been silenced, every dream crushed under arrogance and cruelty. The next morning, she and Rosa met in the same diner. Their hands trembled as they pressed upload. The recordings and documents were released to journalists, social media, and watchdog groups all at once. Within hours, the world exploded. News stations played Alejandro's voice on repeat, his arrogance exposed for millions to hear. Headlines questioned his empire, hashtags trended. But as the noise rose, so did the danger. That night, footsteps echoed outside Naya's apartment. She looked through the peephole and froze. Alejandro himself stood at her door. The knock on her door was soft, almost polite, but Naya's chest rattled with fear. She opened it to find Alejandro alone, his tailored suit immaculate, his eyes blazing with fury contained behind a thin smile. He stepped inside without asking. The air shifted as if the walls themselves held their breath. Naya stood her ground, but her knees trembled. Alejandro spoke calmly, too calmly. He told her she had embarrassed him publicly, cost him millions, damaged his name. He said the storm she had unleashed would destroy her before it ever touched him. His voice was like ice, sharp and certain. Naya listened, every word cutting deeper, but she didn't break. Alejandro leaned closer, his whisper low and venomous. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She could feel his rage vibrating under his skin, but before she could respond, headlights flashed through her window. Police cars. The sound of sirens split the night. Alejandro turned, his smirk faltering for the first time. Rosa had tipped them off. The officers knocked hard, their voices firm. Alejandro straightened his suit, masking his panic with arrogance, but the truth was clear. The storm had reached him. As they pushed through the door with warrants in hand, Naya realized something shocking. The man who thought he was untouchable was finally cornered. The living room lit up with red and blue lights as officers surrounded Alejandro. His hands twitched, but his smile returned, as if charm could erase handcuffs. He tried to talk his way out, spinning lies about misunderstandings and enemies. But Naya stood tall, every ounce of fear burned away. She reminded him of the insults, the threats, the eviction, each word spoken like a blade. The officers listened, taking notes, while Alejandro's mask cracked piece by piece. In a desperate attempt, he turned back to Naya, offering one final deal. He promised wealth, protection, and even forgiveness if she retracted everything. His tone was smooth, but his eyes revealed panic. For a moment, the room felt heavy. The temptation was real. But then Naya remembered every night she had carried her mother to bed, every tear she had swallowed in silence, every humiliation she had endured. She shook her head. Her voice was steady when she told him no. The officers stepped forward, placing handcuffs on Alejandro's wrists. His face drained of color, his body stiff with disbelief. For the first time, the billionaire looked powerless. But the scene wasn't over. As he was escorted out, flashing cameras erupted outside the building. Reporters shouted questions, microphones stretched forward, and Alejandro Veva's name became breaking news. And standing behind him, unseen by most, was Rosa, holding a stack of documents she had passed to the authorities. The warrants weren't just for harassment. They were for fraud, labor crimes, and corruption on a global scale. The news spread like wildfire. Alejandro Vega's empire crumbled within days.
Stockholders fled, partners severed ties, and his once glittering reputation became a headline of shame. The man who mocked a waitress in Spanish was now the face of scandal. Naya was called to testify, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with every word. She spoke not just about her own humiliation, but about the power of cruelty, the dangers of silence, and the dignity every person deserves. Cameras rolled, audiences leaned in, and her story traveled further than she ever imagined. Her mother watched from home, tears streaming down her face. For years she had prayed for strength for her daughter. Now she saw it in full bloom. When the trial ended, Alejandro was led away, his fortune stripped, his power gone. His board replaced him with a new leader, a Latina woman who promised to rebuild the company with integrity. Poetic justice had landed where it was needed most. Naya returned to her home to find letters and scholarships waiting. Universities wanted her. Advocacy groups invited her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a voice. And, in the quiet of her apartment, she leaned close to her mother, whispering words that carried the weight of everything she had endured.
They thought silence was my weakness, but my voice was my weapon. If stories like this move you, if you believe every hidden struggle carries hidden worth, then you belong here. Subscribe now to Hidden Worth Story, where real voices, raw pain, and powerful comebacks are never ignored.